This is Operating System Basics and Application Security, Part 2 of 2, How to Pass TryHackMe SAL1 Multiple Choice Exam. Once again, my name is KD and this is CyberDefend Lab. Alright, welcome to CyberDefend Lab. If you're here, you're on the right track to crushing the multiple choice section of the TryHackMe Security Analyst Level 1 exam. That's the SAL1 exam. This video is part of a structured YouTube series designed specifically to help you pass the SAL1 multiple choice exam. Step by step, no wasted time. Each video builds on the last, covering exactly what you need to know to answer those 80 multiple choice questions with confidence. If this is your first time here, make sure you're following the full CyberDefend Lab SAL1 playlist so you don't miss anything. Now, let's get into it. Imagine spending millions to build the world's most secure bank vault and then leaving the back door wide open. No guards, no alarms, just an open invitation for criminals to stroll in and help themselves. Sounds ridiculous, right? Well, that's exactly what happens when web applications have weak back-end security or unprotected APIs. If your application's back-end isn't locked down, hackers don't need to break in. They just stroll right through. And when that happens, stolen data, leaked credentials, and system takeovers are just the beginning. But don't worry, by the end of this video, you'll understand exactly how to spot and prevent these vulnerabilities, both for your SAL1 exam and in real-world security operations. YouTube is the ultimate study tool reminder. Before we dive in, let's talk about why YouTube is your secret weapon for passing the SAL1 multiple choice exam. You can pause, you can replay, you can deep dive into topics at your own pace. No pressure, no deadlines. And since this is part of the CyberDefend Lab's SAL1 prep playlist, make sure you stick with the entire series for a complete breakdown of everything you need to know. Trust me, this playlist is the best study companion for the SAL1 exam, the multiple choice section of the SAL1 exam. Mandatory disclaimer, legal stuff. Alright, quick heads up before we continue. CyberDefend Lab is not affiliated with TryHackMe in any way. We don't have any insider scoop on the SAL1 exam. Everything in this video is based on publicly available materials and TryHackMe's own learning paths. Our goal is to help you structure your study plan for the multiple choice section of the exam, not to leak exam questions. So, if you're prepping for SAL1, think of this as an additional video guide, not a replacement for TryHackMe's official content. Part 1, Front-End versus Back-End Web Technologies. Number 1, what is the front end? Alright, let's start with the part of the application you actually see, the front end. The front end is everything the user interacts with. The buttons, the text, the images, and the animations that make a website or app visually appealing and user-friendly. Front end equals user interface, or that's the UI, plus user experience, that's the UX. So the front end is equal to UI plus UX. Think of it like the lobby of a luxury hotel. Beautiful chandeliers, marble floors, and concierge staff ready to assist. It's all about presentation. But behind the scenes, there's a lot more going on. Front-end development relies on HTML for structure, CSS for styling, and JavaScript to make things interactive. Popular frameworks like React, Angular, and Vue.js help developers build dynamic and responsive applications. Security considerations for the front end. While front-end code is responsible for what the user sees, it also introduces some security concerns. If developers don't properly validate user input, Attackers can exploit vulnerabilities like cross-site scripting, that's XSS. We'll break that down later, but just know that front-end security is all about preventing user-driven attacks. Number two, what is the backend? Now, let's talk about where the real magic happens, the backend. The backend is the engine of an application. It's responsible for processing requests, handling logic, and storing data securely. Backend equals server plus database plus business logic. And if the front end is a fancy hotel lobby, the back end is the kitchen, the security office, and the entire operations team that make sure everything runs smoothly behind the scenes. Backend development typically involves server-side programming using languages like Python, Java, and PHP. These languages allow developers to build secure, scalable systems that process user requests and manage data efficiently. Number three, front end versus back end security differences. Front end security concerns. Since front end code is directly accessible to users, security risks include input validation failures. For example, users injecting malicious scripts. JavaScript based vulnerabilities, such as XSS attacks, where attackers inject code into a web page. Backend security concerns. The backend, on the other hand, deals with the most sensitive data, which means it's the primary target for serious attacks like SQL injection and authentication bypass. Database security flaws. For example, attackers manipulating database queries to extract sensitive data. Weak API authentication. For example, attackers exploiting poorly secured login mechanisms. Exam tip. Know this. The backend is the prime target for SQL injection and authentication bypass attacks. Expect multiple choice questions that test your understanding of how to secure backend systems. Wrap up and transition to the next section. So now you know the difference between front end and back end security and why back end systems are often the biggest target for attackers. But how do attackers actually intercept web traffic and manipulate vulnerabilities? That's where Wireshark and Burp Suite come in. And don't worry, we'll touch on these in this video. Part 2, APIs and Database Security Fundamentals. Number 1, what is an API? All right, let's talk about the invisible connectors that allow apps and websites to communicate. APIs, also known as Application Programming Interfaces. APIs allow different systems to interact seamlessly, whether it's a web app, mobile app, or cloud service. API equals bridge between applications. Think about the last time you ordered food through an app like Uber Eats or DoorDash. The app itself doesn't make the food and it doesn't process your payment directly. Instead, it sends a request to the restaurant's ordering system and another request to the payment processor, both of which use APIs to talk to each other. APIs power everything, from logging into websites with Google to fetching stock market data in real time. Number 2, API security risks. APIs make our digital lives easier, but they also introduce serious security risks if not properly protected. Let's break down the most common API vulnerabilities. Broken authentication. If an API doesn't properly verify who's making a request, an attacker can steal API keys or tokens and gain access to sensitive data. Unrestricted data exposure. Some APIs return way too much information, exposing sensitive user data. For example, an API might return full customer details when it only needs to confirm a username. If attackers find these endpoints, they can scrape large amounts of personal data. Lack of rate limiting. APIs without rate limits allow brute force attacks, meaning attackers can try thousands of login attempts or token requests per second without being blocked. This is an easy way for them to guess passwords or abuse the system. Number three, database security fundamentals. Databases are gold mines for attackers because they store everything from usernames and passwords to financial records. If an attacker gains access to a database, they can steal, modify, or even delete critical data. Best practices for database security. Use parameterized queries. To prevent SQL injection, always use parameter, parameterized queries, which ensure that database inputs are treated as data, not as executable commands. Encrypt sensitive data. Passwords, credit card numbers, and personal data should always be encrypted at rest and in transit. Even if attackers get access to the database, encrypted data is useless without the decryption key. Implement role-based access control. That's RBAC. Not everyone in an organization should have full database access. RBAC limits access based on roles. So only authorized users can retrieve or modify sensitive data. Exam tip. APIs and databases are major attack points. Expect multiple choice questions, testing how they should be secured. Focus on API authentication, rate limiting, and database protection techniques like encryption and RBAC. Part 3, Web Traffic Analysis with Wireshark and Burp Suite. What is Wireshark? Now that we've covered APIs and databases, let's talk about one of the most powerful tools in a security analyst's arsenal, Wireshark. This is a packet capture tool that allows us to analyze network traffic in real time. If data is being transmitted across a network, Wireshark can capture and inspect it. Wireshark equals network traffic analysis tool. Why is Wireshark useful? It detects suspicious connections in a network. It identifies API abuse and potential data leaks. It helps security analysts investigate cyber attacks in real time. Imagine you're monitoring a company's network and suddenly notice a flood of strange login attempts from an unknown IP address. With Wireshark, you can capture those network packets and see exactly what's going on. Real world use case, detecting unauthorized logins. Let's say an attacker is trying to brute force an API login. Wireshark can capture the repeated failed in login attempts, showing suspicious activity like a high volume of authentication requests in a short period of time. Number 2, what is Burp Suite? While Wireshark focuses on network traffic, Burp Suite is all about web application security. It's a powerful tool that security analysts use to test websites, APIs, and authentication mechanisms for vulnerabilities. Burp Suite equals website security. Burp Suite equals web application security tool. Why is Burp Suite important? It helps manipulate web traffic and security testing. It detects weak authentication mechanisms in websites and APIs. It identifies exposed endpoints that attackers can exploit. Real world use case, intercepting and modifying API requests. Imagine a website has an API that requires an authentication token to access private data. If the API isn't properly secured, Burp Suite can intercept the request, modify it, and potentially bypass authentication. Exam tip. Wireshark and Burp Suite are two completely different tools, but they're both crucial for security analysts. Know when to use each one on the exam. Use Wireshark for network traffic analysis, detecting suspicious connections, and investigating attacks. Use Burp Suite for testing web applications, intercepting API traffic, and finding authentication flaws. This is the end of part 3. Now let's get ready to dive into common web application vulnerabilities. Part 4, common web application vulnerabilities. Number one, SQL injection, SQLI. SQL injection equals injecting malicious SQL code into a database. What is it? All right, first up, SQL injection or SQLI. This is one of the most dangerous web application attacks, and it happens when an attacker injects malicious SQL code into an input field to manipulate a database. How it works. Let's say you're logging into a website and the backend checks your username and password using a standard SQL query. If that input isn't properly validated, an attacker can manipulate it to bypass authentication completely. For example, imagine a login form that asks for a username and password. Instead of typing a real password, an attacker enters this type of text: a single quotation mark, the operator or, then 1 equals 1, and then two hyphens or two dashes. What happens? The SQL query always evaluates to true, so the database thinks the user is authenticated and lets them in. Prevention. Use parameterized queries. This ensures SQL inputs are treated as data, not commands. You can also implement least privilege access. This restricts database permissions, so even if an injection occurs, it can't do much damage. Okay, let's jump into number two, cross-site scripting, which is XSS. Cross-site scripting equals injecting malicious JavaScript into web pages. What is it? Next, we've got cross-site scripting, or XSS. This attack happens when an attacker injects malicious JavaScript into a web page, which then runs in the browser of anyone who visits that page. For example, let's say a hacker finds a comment section on a website that doesn't sanitize input. Instead of typing a normal comment, they insert malicious JavaScript, such as this code right here. You have the opening script and you have the closing script. You have alert, user session has expired, please log in again. Anyone who visits the page sees a fake alert, and if they click on it, they could be redirected to a phishing site that steals their credentials. Prevention. Sanitize user input. Remove or encode special characters before displaying user-generated content. Use a content security policy, CSP. This restricts which scripts can execute in the browser. Number three, authentication bypass. Authentication bypass equals trick login systems to gain unauthorized access. What is it? Now let's talk about authentication bypass, one of the most frustrating yet common security flaws. This happens when an attacker tricks an authentication mechanism into letting them in without valid credentials. Example, let's say an API has a login endpoint, but instead of properly verifying passwords, it just checks if a username exists. An attacker can send a request with no password, and if the system doesn't enforce authentication properly, boom, they're in. An API request that sends something like username, admin, password, blank space, they could still get a success response. Prevention. Enforce multi-factor authentication, or MFA. This adds an extra security step beyond just passwords. Use secure session management. Sessions should expire properly and tokens should be checked for integrity. Exam tip. Expect questions on all three of these web vulnerabilities: SQL injections, XSS, and authentication bypass. You need to know how they work and, most importantly, how to prevent them. SQL, SQLI. Use parameterized queries. They prevent SQL injection, or SQLI, by ensuring user input is treated as data rather than executable code. cross-site scripting, or XSS. Sanitize input and use CSP. Remember, Content Security Policy, CSP, helps mitigate cross-site scripting by restricting which scripts can run on a page. Authentication bypass, enforce multi-factor authentication, MFA, and session security. Okay, we've reached the end of part 4, and now let's head into wrap up with motivation and next steps. Part 5, motivation and exam success mindset. All right, before we wrap up, let's talk about something important. Your mindset. Your mindset. If you've made it this far, you're actually already ahead of most exam takers just by being here. A lot of people get overwhelmed by security concepts. But here's the truth. You can master these topics. I believe in you. You can do this 100%. Just keep going. Success in cybersecurity is about pattern recognition. Web security isn't about memorizing every single exploit. It's about recognizing patterns and understanding why these vulnerabilities exist. The more you see these attack techniques, the more they'll start clicking for you. Reminder to use YouTube as your secret weapon. And don't forget, YouTube is the ultimate study tool. You can pause, you can play, you can replay, and take notes at your own pace. There's no pressure, no time limits. Just focus learning whenever you need it. That's why this CyberDefend Lab SAL1 prep playlist is here. Make sure you use this playlist. This is to make sure you don't just study, but you actually understand what you're learning. What you're going to do is replay, pause, take notes, and you will master the exam. You will master the multiple choice section of the SAL1 exam. Once again, I believe in you. You can do this. You've got this. Keep watching, keep learning, and stay consistent. Every minute you spend preparing brings you one step closer to acing your SAL1 exam and leveling up your cybersecurity career. You're going to take action now. If you made it this far, it's clear you're serious about passing the multiple choice section of the SAL1 exam. And that kind of dedication is exactly what separates those who struggle from those who succeed. So, if you found this helpful, hit that subscribe button, give this video a thumbs up, and most importantly, follow the full SAL1 prep playlist here on YouTube on my channel so you don't miss anything. Every video builds on the last, so make sure you're getting the full breakdown of what you need for the multiple choice section of the SAL1 exam. Once again, my name is KD. This is CyberDefend Lab at CyberDefend Lab.